So much to cover and so little time, but I wanted to go into some of the things that I think has given me an extra step or an extra boost, which is working with lots of different people, and that ultimately comes down to building an amazing team. A little bit about me. I was the CMO of Valuer.ai. They fired my ass about a month and 3 weeks ago, so I am representing myself, Clint Marketing. It's basically been a pet project for a couple of years, so when I do a lot of these and I love getting in front of people, often people are like, hey, do you make money doing this? Do you want to charge us? And I'm like, yeah, let's do that. So I started this, and I also work on a company that I started called Architecture Quote, which is basically aggregating deals or leads for the architecture industry. So a little bit about me. You can tell by the accent, not Danish. I'm originally from Washington, D.C. I've been in Denmark for the last 4 years. I've co-founded 6 different startups. I think technically the number's at like 7 or 8, but I don't count stuff that fails after like 3 months. So yeah, it's been a wild ride. It makes me feel super old when I tell people I've been in the startup scene for 12 years, but it's part of the jazz. I was lucky enough to graduate in 2008 at the height of the economic recession, which means nobody's hiring brand new people in the workforce. So it was one of those just kind of, hey, this is how we have to do things in order to stay afloat. I consider myself a mentor, startup junkie. I don't like the phrase guru, but I call myself a growth hacker. I teach a lot of different things in a lot of different places. Last night, Gintz and I were over at CBS, KU, what are the other ones that are listed on there? ITU, DTU, CPH Business, Nordic Growth Hackers, yeah, I'm all over the map. These are some of the projects that I work on. So that's Architecture Quote up there. Hit me up if you want the slides, unless you're an agency, no dice, that's kind of the industry that I'm in now. I teach a 2-day masterclass over at Talent Garden, which is essentially a lot of the stuff that I'm going over here, and obviously much more. So if you really hate my voice, you're probably not going to enjoy the course, but it's just 16 hours of me going like this. And Taylor Ryan I.O. is basically where people can find me in order to get me on stage and that kind of stuff. So my goal for today is plain and simple. I'm trying to provide value. I want to give people something to walk away with. So even if you're not in a hiring manager position, I still want to go into some of the growth hacky stuff. So when I first talked with Dino, who's organizing a lot of this stuff, he was like, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, hey man, I go where I'm needed. So what area do you want to speak on? And I threw out a couple of things, and he's like, how about building teams? And I'm like, it's not really technical, but okay. So I want to show how I've used a lot of marketers in order to really grow a brand and essentially build something out of zero. So understanding the audience itself and why people are here is super important for me. So the idea is I'm trying to get a feel for the audience. How many people actually have a team underneath them right now? Oh, all right, it's a good room then, cool. How many people work in startups? All right, my people, cool. Okay, very good. And how many people consider themselves growth hackers or technical marketers? All right, a few. Nice. We went from a lot down to very little. Cool. I like to kind of give my own definition because it becomes like bullshit buzzword bingo when you start looking at competencies within marketing, which is incredibly frustrating when everybody uses the phrase growth hacking. To me, it's basically applying bootstrapping in order to get something done. So it's doing the most with the least amount of time, the least amount of resources to get the biggest results. What is the biggest effect that I can get with spending the least amount of money and time so I can continue to rapidly get things done? It's instead of a 1-for-1 approach, it's a 1 for 50, 1 for 1,000, 1 for 100,000. So the analogy that I always give when people maybe aren't in the world of marketing that I think is a bit more clear, it's basically the difference between theoretical and practical. So let's say that your car breaks down and you need to bring it to the mechanic, and there's 2 mechanics on staff. One has read every book about fixing your particular car over the last 5 years, but has never actually gotten under the hood. The other one has fixed every single element of that vehicle that you drive over the last 5 years and can basically take it apart, put it back together with their eyes closed. I want the second person to work on my car because they know what they're doing. They've been through all of the trial and errors and all the problems. They've confronted these scenarios. That's where growth hacking actually lives. It's doing the work. It's getting the experience. Whenever I'm trying to inspire new marketers, and often most marketers when they're getting into our field don't really know exactly what they want to do, But I think it's building up from a core base of something they're interested in. So for a lot of people, it might be writing, content. So nothing within the world of marketing lives on its own. There is no island when it comes to marketing or growth hacking. So if you get good at one thing, you can start to apply it to all the others. So if you understand content, that means you got a pretty good shot at understanding how PR and amplification work. After you understand that, maybe you can start touching some of the technical sides of SEO. You understand that, and we can start applying it to more and more and more and more. I want somebody that wants to learn everything and absorb everything all the time. We can't be one narrow area. We need to be an understanding person of all things, but have a core competency. A lot of people use this T-shaped marketers thing, but because my name's Taylor, I'm like, I don't know. It's weird. So I want to go into building a marketing team because I've had relative success with this. I basically have scaled 4 different startups, small companies here in Denmark. So Planday, Genie Belt, Actimo, and then Valuer. Valuer was voted best new startup in Denmark, and I honestly credit the people that worked with me, the really new interns that just wanted to learn, more so than anybody else in that company, because honestly, they did the work. So here's what a really, there we go. Here's what a bootstrap team looks like. Not the guys on the right. That's exciting to get new suits, but this is what it's breaking down to. So it's a graphic designer. I need somebody to help me with visuals. Super important. Every piece of content should have a visual element, even if it's a podcast. I need that title screen. A content writer, somebody that's a storyteller, somebody that can give an edge to something, somebody that can play with words. SEO/growth hacker, we have to be able to understand how to get amplification going and reach people that are within our target group, within our audience, and actually get them to see what we're putting out. Because you can write the greatest piece of content in the world, but if nobody finds it, who gives a shit? Videography. Everything is so visual nowadays. That's why I'm recording this. And any presentation that you do, why not throw it out to the world? Front-end development and back-end development, honestly, in this day and age, I need people that can help me convert, optimize, and streamline processes. That means I'm building resource sections. That means I need landing pages, and then I need to A/B test everything. I need something in the way of Google Tag Manager attached to every form and make sure that I'm technically there. So much easier to go through my own person than be like, well, whenever product's finished with that thing that they were working on, and it's like, no, you're marketing, go back to your desk. We do product. This is a way for me to kind of circumvent that. So again, I've been an intern, and I know that some people are a little apprehensive about this, but this is one of the greatest things about Denmark, aside from obviously not having to pay for school. I came out of my education with 4 years of student loan debt, ultimately $45,000. But a lot of schools in Denmark basically require a 3-month internship in order to graduate. So the idea is, hey, why not come hustle with me? I got what you're looking for. So you essentially are getting more work done with less. Did you realize that 30% of marketers' daily projects are repetitive tasks? Why not offload that to somebody that just wants to learn and get the basics out of the way? Stop doing repetitive tasks. That's a job for an intern. Once you understand how to do these things, pass it along to somebody that wants to get there and learn. In terms of learning lessons, I'm going to go into how they're structured and why they're there. The reason that people stay with companies, the reason that interns eye up your company versus others, is they want to get something out of you. Usually that's not money. They want to fucking learn all the different tools. They want to understand, how do I get to your level? How do I become you in 4 years? How do I get to do all these crazy things that I only hear about in school? Well, stick with me, I'll show you. And that's the difference between a good manager, a good team leader, and an awesome company to work for, and somebody that's just using free labor. You know, there's a difference. So it's really easy to streamline this stuff. You can either use interns, virtual assistants, or essentially, if you wanted to do the work, you could do it yourself. But I create tons of job posts and essentially post on multiple sites. I have all the different logins spelled out, so if I'm not able to do it in one day, I'll have somebody else do it. And by the way, with with the Hub and with Graduate Land, basically the most recent post pops up to the top. So during this kind of key area right now, when people are hiring for next semester, I need to make sure I'm putting out a post every single week. And they don't remove anything. So the idea is you continue to get the best new people that are coming in and looking quickly to see what's kind of the fresh job that's out there. Spreadsheets help you stay organized, Google Sheets, and I always use Calendly for invites. It's like playing fucking Battleship when it's saying, can you do 2 o'clock On Wednesday, it's like, well, that's not gonna work for me. You're back and forth with like 10 different emails. Set up Calendly. It integrates super easy with Gmail, and it saves you hundreds of hours in the long run by not having to have that battleship conversation. So I'm a big proponent of thinking essentially that meetings are mostly just what an email should be. There's no reason to have a department-wide meeting ever, with very few exceptions, or a company-wide meeting other than to kind of inspire, rah, rah, go us. So there's a really great idea, Jeff Bezos basically calls it the 2 pizza rule. So there should be no real meetings that are critical to moving forward and setting benchmarks, project-related meetings. No 2 meetings that honestly keep more people than could feed 2 pizzas around evenly. So basically, don't make any meetings that have more than 7 people, because why the fuck do you need that many people with input, right? The idea is that could be a Slack message or an email, but it's not meant to drag everybody's time away. And honestly, don't do meetings on 9 a.m. on Monday. Nobody's thinking about you or anything else. They're not focused. And I don't take 9 a.m. meetings, by the way. 9:15 at the latest or the earliest. I do meetings once a week for my departments. I sometimes will do once every 2 weeks, but I keep it really simple within the marketing department. I basically ask everybody to go in on a Google Sheet, tell me what you worked on last week, tell me what you're working on this week, tell me what you need help with. Boom, 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 boom. Never longer than 45 minutes and we're out. And that's when I had 30 marketers over at Valuer, right? So over the span of the year and 8 months that I was there, we went through 120 marketers, which is way too many. But the reality was, I got to pick and choose the best of the best. And unfortunately, I had to say goodbye to some amazing people, but I've definitely set them up with a lot of different projects. I've given them jobs through references and made sure to say, hey, do you know anybody that does, like, fuck yeah, Cindy's amazing, go hit her up. The idea is that I want to be the manager that I never had, and I'm gonna go into detail later, but yeah. So choosing the right marketers can be really difficult, especially if there's salary in play and you only get a few months to really figure out if you like them, and it's really hard to get rid of people. So I measure something called the CLAMS exercise. Little side note, I won a $4.3 million government contract to basically teach veterans how to get back to work. And the idea is, I'd like to think I know what I'm talking about. So we kind of derived the main interests in terms of jobs into 5 areas. So challenge. It's essentially what drives you. Are you interested in learning? Are you passionate about this company, this job? Second one, location. Some people just want to not have a commute. And that's a big thing where I come from. I'm from Washington, D.C., and I got to tell you, second worst traffic in the United States besides L.A. Really rough. Advancement. Some people are ambitious as shit, and they just want to be at the very top at some point. These are overachievers, and I love that, but that shouldn't be the only driver. Money. Some people, especially when you're fresh out of school, it's like, man, I want to make that money, you know, and I get that because I was there. And that's why I jumped into sales to start with. Security. Some people just want to be with a place that they can stay with forever and never be fired. And I can certainly understand that. And these priorities change when life events happen, whether it's having a kid or taking care of a sick parent or something to that effect. This is one of my favorite posters. I worked in a government consulting firm, basically a really bad place. But they had a ton of these stupid posters on the wall. Motivation, you know, and it's supposed to give somebody like a feeling of like, yeah, we're gonna do this. I love this poster because it basically says, if a pretty poster and a cute saying are all it takes to motivate you, you probably have a very easy job, the kind that robots will be doing soon. It's a long way to go to say that don't waste your time on these silly things that really don't actually motivate people. These rah-rah go us moments are really fleeting and are not memorable. It's more one-on-one. I do think I asked Dino if it was possible to throw it through on Slido to ask which one of these kind of areas are your biggest motivators. I'd love to find out the results on that. If we don't have it, we can move on. Cool. Assigning projects. So, I think we're good. Okay, assigning projects. So when I sit down with somebody who's at their first day, I ask them a very simple question. What do you want to learn? What is it that you want to get better at? And I don't accept, I want to do strategy. Because strategies, like, what does that even mean? Like, what part of an internship has to do with strategy? It's like, well, I want to tell other people what, like, we should be putting our time into. I had an intern tell me that they want to focus on how we can put together a go-to-market strategy for the United States. They were from Lithuania. And I'm like, interesting, I'm actually from there. I'm not sure what your insights are going to be, but it's probably not a good use of either of our time. So I push people in the general direction that they're already leaning, and I give them a choice of 3 projects. So if you're a designer, let's give you 3 different projects. One might be an infographic, another might be blog post, feature images, and maybe one more is a social post. And whichever one they choose, they own that. The idea is that if they start struggling with these things, I get to point back to it and say, hey, this is the one you chose. I thought you wanted to do this. And that basically keeps them motivated. So it's a roundabout psychology way of basically saying, look, you call the shots here. Who am I? And you should have enough projects to go around regardless. There's never enough time to get enough stuff done. But essentially, it gives autonomy. It makes the project their own, which they do give a bigger shit about. And honestly, it's a cool way to do fairness. It gives them the feeling of like, hey, like somebody actually asked me what I think, which honestly doesn't happen in most early jobs. And honestly, again, they are far less likely to give up. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but again, strategy's nothing, right? If you haven't built up kind of the dirt underneath your fingers, I don't think you have any play in terms of what you think actually should be going on here. Now, of course, I'll take any suggestion. And if you can show me why a project idea can work, let's go for it. Fuck it. Who am I to say no? If you really want to own this and this is your jam, yeah, go for it. Like, I don't care if we fuck it up. Like, it's not a big deal. We can change it tomorrow and take it down. Not a big deal. But I do think ideas are junk. Execution is everything, because we could sit in this room for at least 3 hours and come up with all the most brilliant ideas in the world, but if nobody actually does the work, then none of this matters. None of it. In terms of managing, I realize that I have a bit of a flair to me. I can be loud. I think the most important thing to realize is that some of the things that stick with us are really, really quite bizarre. So my first job as an intern, I was 16 years old. I worked for a company called Kids Online with a Z instead of an S, so it's cool. So I worked for these guys, and I was doing video production. I wasn't being paid. I was really into the job, showing up every day after school. And basically one day, I think it was probably 2 months in, this guy basically goes, hey, get set up over here. And I go, well, Adam, I don't know if this is actually the right angle, because we're going to be shooting right into the sun. Everybody's going to be silhouetted. And he goes, Taylor, we don't pay you to think. Oh, yeah, that's right. We don't pay you at all. Fuck that guy. Are you kidding me? I was 16. 17 years later, I still remember that like yesterday. And it's so bizarre how one little flippant comment can stick with people forever. So no matter how stressed I am, no matter how overworked I am, scattered, I can never lend myself to be that, because honestly, it would destroy me. I want to be the person that I never got to be managed by. Here's your fucking chance. Give somebody a moment to actually realize, like, hey, this boss actually cares about me. And it's really hard to find those these days, quite frankly. With a lot of the process and a lot of the stuff that we all have to do on a regular basis, I think it's really important to set at least something in the way of expectations to those at the very top, especially if you're in a startup or in a smaller company, or if you're just bringing a new project kind of up and running. Within marketing, I always tell people, look, if we're doing SEO, if we're doing something in the way of some major growth over the next year, it's going to take 6 months to build a solid foundation with all the processes, and then another 6 months to scale it. Anybody else that tells you different is selling you something or an asshole. So I'm just telling you straight up, this is a great way to set expectations with Chris Farley, and it is a meme and it does run, but it is what it is. So learning lessons. This is why people stick around underneath me, is because I give them a little bit of knowledge every week. It's a drip. It's a constant chance to learn. And by the way, I want to make sure that I'm working with people that want to learn. So I do learning lessons every week, 45 minutes to an hour, and I basically pick a new area every time. So last week is creating dashboards. Really simple, really easy, and a different way of basically doing monthly reports, automated, so I don't have to do it every month. Or the week before was essentially shooting in rule of thirds and white balancing on a digital SLR camera. And the week after is basically a UX experiment and how we A/B test and use Google Optimize. Every single person on the marketing team is sitting there and watching, and everybody gets to digest, learn, and see it. I don't care if you're a front-end developer and will never write a piece of content in your entire life. I want you to understand the nuances of how it works, so there might be something that you connect later. And the idea is that it shouldn't always be me that's teaching these things. So it's not supposed to be the Taylor show, it's supposed to be our show. And so the idea is give an intern a chance to explain, this is how we started this project, this is how we built it, and these were the results. Everybody gets to learn. I build on every single drive of every single company I've ever started with. It's basically kind of a learning folder. For all the projects that we ever started, beginning, middle, and end, here's the process so that if, for whatever reason, I'm struck by lightning or all of my interns leave at once, which they do every 3 months, then somebody can jump right back in and pick up the processes and run with it. And I kid you not, it's so valuable to have this. It takes no time at all, screenshot everything, put it in the drive. It requires a little bit of prep work, but I promise it's really helpful. So my degree was in psychology, so I bring a lot of psychology principles into this. There's something called the protege effect. It's the idea of you get better at a task or better at something in general by teaching it to somebody else. I give my interns a chance to learn something like amplification and then teach it to a bunch of other people. So Gintz has gotten amazing at doing amplification. Essentially, we do outreach to 100 people that have written a similar post and 100 people that are potentially mentioned in the post. And the idea is that we get about a 20% response rate. This is not brain science, this is just simple. And the idea is that, great, so let's give somebody else a chance to learn. Gintz, let's give you a new project to get more complex, more individualized, more personalization. Let's do something. And so the idea is like, hey, here's an opportunity. Now you're the teacher. And it's a lot of fun. So I had a really strange question last night when I was teaching over at CBS. This girl's like, how do you know all this stuff? And it's a really simple answer. It's just doing the fucking work. Like, it's not sexy. So this is what my weekends look like. There's Casper Rauschman on the far right side. That's my living room when I first moved here. So I used to bring marketers into my place between 11 and 6:30 and say, we all have projects. What can I help you with? If you want to hustle over there, that's cool. I'm going to hustle over here, and let's work together, even though we have completely different projects, completely different outcomes. Many of these that's a coffee shop, that's Founder's House, this is Talent Garden. I teach my course, the master class, in order to get free rent. So a little trade there, but the idea is like, why are you here unless you dig this shit? Like, there's no reason in doing any job if you're not into it. So, I don't know, I mean, maybe it's just a way to pay the bills, but I love this shit. And I love teaching this stuff because I want to see that spark, huh? I want to see that spark in everybody. And I don't know, it's something that doesn't cost anything other than time, and I got plenty of that right now. One of the hardest things that I consistently have to push in terms of getting people that don't have a ton of experience to kind of overcome is that last 10%. The difference between amazing and meh is that last 10% where you don't finish every single thought, or you're like, good enough. Right? And this is one of those old adages, so like the enemy of great is good enough. I don't want people to produce good enough. I don't want meh. I want something that's fucking outstanding that people come up to me afterwards and go, dude, what you just did there was something I've always wanted to try. And it's like, well, you can do it too. It's just you have to be a little crazy and focus. So one of the greatest pieces of content that scaled an entire company was the Dollar Shave Club video. Has anybody seen this? Is anybody? Okay, cool. So Dollar Shave Club is essentially bought out by Gillette. It's razors that you get in the mail, so they just send you a new set of razors every month. Not all that innovative of an idea, but the reality is one single piece of content essentially scaled them to the point that they were sold for $3 billion. That's with a B. So I don't have that kind of money sitting in the, it's $1 billion. It was $1 billion. But over the span of 3 years, that's how they did it, was one piece of content. And this is always going to be the case, the Pareto principle. I realize that a lot of projects that I work on, that I put my blood, sweat, and tears to, will never see the actual kind of expansive growth and explosion that I thought they would. But the reality is it doesn't have to be. So 20% of the content that I produced over at Valuer was driving 80% of the traffic. If you look into the analytics on your different companies' sites, I guarantee you're going to see the same thing. This one article, 50 examples of corporations that failed to innovate, this article essentially got more traffic than all the blog posts combined for the better part of a year. It works, and the idea is it's because I gave a shit and we focused on it and we had a bunch of different hands in the jar, and it worked. So one way to take a look at what your competitors are doing really well and potentially steal it and make a better version of it, this is called the skyscraper technique by Brian Dean from Backlinko. The idea is throw your competitors into Ahrefs, hit top content, and see what they're doing really well. The idea is that if you build a better version of that, you're essentially taking your competitor's best player and you're making him play for your team. And the idea, quite frankly, is not stealing. It's basically saying, I know you're really good at this, I want to be better at your best thing. And it's scary, and it works, and I've seen it work against me as well. CB Insights is essentially one of the competitors of Valuer. They did the same thing, but with products instead of corporations that failed to innovate. Pretty clever stuff. And another kind of side way of doing this that I find really fascinating is get this within publishers within your industry. Folks that are putting out a ton of content. And you'd be surprised. This is the foundation for essentially building more on social media, more in different channels. Maybe you got a podcast, but it continues to scale no matter how you frame it. It's the best stuff, the most engaged stuff on any platform that you can eventually use on your own. And it's fascinating to see it work. So I want to do a little bit of growth hacky kind of stuff, so I'm going into some social media hacks real quick. So social media has changed over the last 10 years. Everybody's focused on this meaningful engagement kick. So you'll see that over the coming years, Instagram's idea of basically removing the likes and only going for comments, it's going to throw a lot of people off, but there's a reason behind that. It means that somebody actually gave a shit more than a tap. And by the way, that tap of a like has been dwindling since the early 2000s. People like less shit less of the time. They don't want to give you the credit for it. I get people all the time, it's like, hey, I saw that post, and it's like, well, you didn't like give me props or anything. It's like, yeah, well, I don't give a shit about you. And it's like, all right, thanks, and it happens, and that's okay. But I think you should think about, what can I do in order to get people talking? What can I do to engage people? And one of the most frustrating things that I think all of us are dealing with if you're doing anything related to social media is the lack of reach. So organic reach, according to a number of surveys, people are like, yeah, it's about 2% on like company pages. No, it's not. It's far from that. It's 0.002% of whatever you post gets an impression to the people that are actually following your page. So the reality is nothing that you do on those company pages matters at all. I promise it doesn't. So the best way to get followers on LinkedIn, here's the secret, post more job ads. That's how you get followers. Womp womp, and that sucks. Who wants to do that? Just to trick people into following your page because you might post another job that's related to them? Meh. So I want to show a couple of different things on how to do that, but I also wanted to dissect really briefly Facebook's algorithm when it loads. So Facebook's algorithm really simply is basically taking inventory of other content that's hitting basically at the same time and trying to diversify so you can't have 1,000 videos hitting your newsfeed all at once. It's checking the signals. So what is my history as a publisher and somebody that's putting out content against the demographics that I tend to actually get the most engagement? So if you're trying to sell to somebody that tends not to engage with your stuff historically, they're not going to engage with it in the future because they're not seeing it. And then it has kind of a predictive element, which is what is the core of this post and what are the opportunities for it to actually get people into conversations. So I wanted to show an example of folks that are actually doing a real good job at social media. I wish I had more time, but this is just one example. This is Wendy's. Wendy's is a smash mouth, crazy brand when it comes to promotions. And on Twitter, they're dirty. And I love it. I think it's clever as shit. And the idea is they're not like, hey, we're doing a deal on our new bacon chicken sandwich. Fuck that. They're just messing with people. And they get far more engagement doing that than anything else. And the idea is that, hey, it's still known as Wendy's brand. It has a subconscious impression rate. And the idea is it takes 8 to 20 different impressions in order for you to make a buying decision. But if they continue to find something that might excite you, might make you laugh, they've already won the game. So some simple ways, if we all have to think ourselves of how to actually get, 5 minutes, how to get real engagement. Here are a couple of quick techniques. So I think personal versus company is going to be the new frontier. So the idea is that promoting your brand, your company, yourself is going to consistently get more engagement, more likes, more comments, more friend requests, more reach over time than anything you could do on your company page. I don't see any company pages ever going viral on social media anymore. And the reason is because they're not trying to give you the chance to do that. You got to pay for it. And I'm not doing that. I had an interesting question when I gave this talk out in Sweden. And essentially the person was like, well, what if the communications department doesn't want you to say stuff about your company? Then you need to get the fuck out of that organization because you should love where you work. I mean that. If you like what you do, then you're already a step ahead of most. And I want to be in a company where I can talk about how jazzed up I get about our product. So think about that if you're in the communications department. Last little bit, tons of different things on basically reusing content. So every single post that picks up and has at least, I'm looking at maybe 50 to 60 engagements, I re-release every 3 weeks. Because if it worked 3 weeks ago, it's going to work 3 weeks from now, and then the 3 weeks later. And I also basically reuse content all the time. So every great blog post turns into an ebook. And by the way, Tripwire content, I capture your email address in order to download something you can find on my blog, no problem. This continually works, and it's crazy, and people continue to engage with it. Re-release everything all the time. I don't think I have enough time. I know, right? How much, do I have like 2 minutes? Okay, I'll go a little longer. So this was one of the ways that I taught over in, in Malmö. And you would have thought that I was explaining to people how to cook like meth in their kitchen or something, because people were squirming. So this is essentially stealing the most engaged content on social media groups and making it work for yourself. So first stage is discovery. I need to find the most engaged groups within my niche, my industry, and start lining them up so I know how to find the most engaged content. I go through and either use Upwork people or interns. So Upwork people, $4 an hour to go through and basically give me the URL, the link to the most engaged posts. Those happen to be visual, consistently visual, and I basically can then put those in a spreadsheet, download the visuals, and make sure that I am putting out content that's relatively similar. Controversy works, call to actions, lots of questions, memes, that kind of stuff. Starts to look like this. Don't do this for video because you get slapped. And then I tweak it, right? So I make it my own. The concept is very simple. If I can basically take somebody's message, redirect it and make it look original and brand new, wrap it in tinfoil and call it low fat, then I win. The next stage is then swapping it out after you post it in these highly engaged groups. So I post this exact kind of message that worked in this group, over in this group, and then I decide, okay, after it's reached about 100 engagements, I will edit the post, and unfortunately I can't show you editing the post, dropping a link to one of my blog posts or an article I'm trying to promote, and then essentially deleting that link, but the preview image is still there, and hitting post. And all of a sudden I'm getting bumped back up to the top of the group, and people are engaging with a piece of content that I wrote that was never the original piece because it's somewhat related, but the idea is I'm getting shitloads of engagement. So what does that look like? It looks like this. Free Facebook traffic by basically using somebody else's content that I tweaked to make original to get more traffic to ultimately push my message or traffic to my blog post. And over time, this has an interesting effect on organic traffic. Haven't quite figured that out yet, but it's capturing more organic, and I'm assuming it's part of the psychology principle of social proof that Google is working into their algorithms, because the better you are in social media, the more likely you are to rank for these certain key phrases. It's troubling and also really cool, but yeah. I don't know. I think I should probably stop here and take some time for questions. Yeah? Okay. I don't know, does anybody have questions on Slido? You can yell them out. I don't know, can you pull it up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a bunch of questions. The first one is, does your point hold true if your only sales channel is brick and mortar?
Why would your only sales channel be brick and mortar? What kind of business model? Just curious. Does anybody have an example of that?
You guys want to add something to the question? Please go ahead.
It's a flawed question. So like, there shouldn't only be brick and mortar sales unless you're like a drug dealer. Then I kind of get that. But the idea, well, and even then, I'd still use social media. So I feel like if you're only using brick and mortar, you're missing the entire point of this speech and the conference, right? So like, no offense, okay, good, anonymous, but it's a fair question. It's just, why would we only use, a brick and mortar way of doing this? We're talking about digital growth.
Can it hurt your brand to have to have an army of interns and no one to care for them?
Can it hurt the what?
Your brand, because I mean, I've been an intern many times, and sometimes the work is shit.
Yeah,
You're not
fair.
expressing your best.
So it obviously depends on the way that they're managed and the manager themselves, and this is not meant for everybody. Some people can't pause in the middle of their work in order to look up and say, sorry, what did you ask? Or honestly, if your goal is not to teach people, then don't do this. Don't just use people. The idea that I'm giving people is nobody else is teaching this. They're certainly not giving it away at school. And I'm not making anybody into my coffee bitch. I'm making you into somebody that can execute and learn everything so quickly that the next job that you step into, you're able to go, oh, that's exactly like this. Here's the tool that we used, and boom, 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 boom. So I'm educating at the same time giving them real projects to honestly like mess up all the time. So like one of the most popular articles that we had was the 50 cities or 50 top cities in the world for startups. An intern wrote that piece. And it was one of those things where we're like, fuck it, put Helsinki at number 2, because why not? And hey, Tokyo needs to be number 50. They've had their time. We just made up the results. The Prime Minister of Helsinki retweeted the article and it went viral. And it was all made up, you know, and half the links didn't work and it was all right. I was like, hey, Anastasia, nice job. Like, you nailed it. Way to go. And that should be everybody's, you know, like direction is like, yeah, give everybody a shot. Of course, there's going to be things that we have to pull back and we got to tweak later. But yeah, I would want to work in a place where I'm valued as a resource and as a person and not just a workhorse. And I totally get where you're coming from, and that sucks that you've been through that.
Round of applause for Tyler.